Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true.
So in 2020, I moved into this house and I instantly started noticing things. Me and my family did. A couple of the things were small, things like hearing the faucet turn on when there was no one home, smelling flowery perfume, cigarette smoke, things like that. Well, a couple months after we moved in, I had two experiences happen within about a month of each other. The first experience, I was in my room and I came downstairs. The way that the downstairs is set up, you have your hallway and then the living room, the dining room, and then the kitchen. So when you come down the stairs, you can see the dining room from the stairs. So when I walked down, I saw my sister sitting at the table. Didn't think much of it, so I kept on walking and I got into the kitchen and looked again, and she wasn't there. I was like, that's odd. I'm pretty sure I just saw her. So I walk into the kitchen and I look off to the right into the living room, and my sister is asleep on the couch. And it was just me and her there. And thinking back to that, I definitely saw a person sitting at the table, and they had kind of like a gray face, and it almost looked like a little boy. So that was scary. And then about a month later, I was completely home alone and I was just sitting in the kitchen. This is in the kitchen and living room area again. I was sitting at the island in the kitchen just scrolling on my phone, and I heard someone tap on the window behind me. And I turned around, kind of looked at it, and I was like, "Ah, I'm just hearing things. Kept on scrolling on my phone, and then I heard it again. And I was like, okay, my sister's pranking me, like she's up to something. Whatever. So I ignored it, and I kept scrolling on my phone, and then maybe a couple minutes later, I heard more tapping on the window. So this time I actually turned around and looked, and I saw someone back away from the window. And I was like, okay, haha, you're so funny, just blew it off again. And I'm sitting there scrolling on my phone, and then it hits me a couple minutes later. I am completely home alone. My sister is in a completely different town at the moment. There is no one else there with me. So I was so freaked out that I called the police and they came and did like a search around the area, went through the backyard, made sure everything was okay, and there was no one around. We were all good. Well, I still had trouble sleeping that night because I could have swore someone was knocking on the window and messing with me. And there's like no trees around that could have been knocking on the window, so it definitely was someone knocking on the window. Well, the next day comes and it's daylight out, so I go into the backyard to see if I can see anything, like any footsteps, any traces of anyone being in the backyard. And I walk up to the window where I heard the knocking, and I realize that where I saw the person's face was in like the top corner of the window, and that was about 7 to 8 feet high. No one is 7 to 8 feet tall, and it wasn't someone jumping up to that height because I saw them straight move back. And yeah, the only explanation I have for that is a ghost, because there's no way it was a person, no way. But yeah, that's my stories.
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true. I'll go.
Everyone from New Mexico has at least one or two good ghost stories. I'll tell you about how my hometown is built on a mass grave and how I made a promise to a ghost that I have to see out for the rest of my life. So in the early 15 and 1600s, the Spaniards were coming in full effect, mostly through Tenochtitlan, which the Spaniards later named New Spain, now known as Mexico City. There was a route that would take you through Tenochtitlan to El Paso up to Taos. Taos was important because it was the promised land for the Spaniards. They were told that there was silver, gold, jewels, minerals, wealth, and the royals in Spain said, give me that. So they wanted all their Spaniards to go up to Taos, plunder, and send it back home. So they tried. So there was these caravans coming out of Mexico City headed to Taos. There was a couple of them. They were all a day or two apart, and there were a couple hundred people per caravan. So the first one gets to El Paso, and they get warned, don't go any further unless you're sure you have everything you need to fend off these Apaches, because they've been actively raiding in this area. They're strong warriors, and they will get you. The caravan said, we got this. We could do this. So they keep going. They come across Mesilla. Mesilla was a little pueblo outside of El Paso in New Mexico. It just consisted of a church at the time, and that church is actually still standing. They set up camp, and they didn't realize they were watched and followed. Please correct me if I'm wrong. This is just what I've heard. That the Apache don't kill or fight at night. I think it's a bad omen. So they wait for the morning. The sun comes up, and everyone. The Apache successfully raids. Everyone is, and they leave. The second caravan reaches the first caravan's camp and sees everyone slaughtered. And they start digging and start burying everyone. Everyone has their own grave. Everyone has their own cross. And they keep going forward to Taos. That became the Valley of the Crosses. It was like a field of crosses across this route that would take you up north. And so it became a landmark. They would say you reach the Valley of the Crosses and you have 2 or 3 days and you're in Taos. With the influx of people that came into this region later on, Mesilla grew. So they were forced to build onto this mass grave just to be able to accommodate everyone. And that town was named the City of the Crosses, or Las Cruces. So that's where I'm from. I'm from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and this town is built on a mass grave. The home that I was raised in was very haunted, specifically by 4 spirits. The first one was a 5-year-old girl, blue plaid dress, pigtails, blonde curls. Second one was a buffalo soldier. The buffalo soldiers were actually really common in this region. 19 miles north of Las Cruces, New Mexico, there's a fort. It's called Fort Selden. This was a fort specifically made for the buffalo soldiers. The third spirit was a cowboy. He was a jerk, and he had a pipe, and he would flick ghost matches at you. They weren't real matches, but they were little fireballs, and he'd flick them at you just to be a jerk. And the fourth one wasn't really a spirit. It was or like a portal. It was a black vortex type thing. I don't know. It was scary. Anyways, fast forward, I'm 10 years old and I get offered my own room. I don't have to share a room with my sister anymore. It just so happens to be the most spiritually active room in the whole house. So I'm terrified, but I take it because I want the space. And I'm white knuckling through the fear. I coped in the worst way possible. Don't ever do this. The way I coped, what I did was every night before bed, when I was most scared, I would lift the blanket next to me and I would say to the little girl specifically, if you promise to never let me see you, I will be your friend forever. I said that. And I put the blanket back on her, like I was tucking her in. And I would say that every time I was scared, which was a lot. I was scared a lot. Fast forward, I'm 18 years old. My car is packed. I'm leaving town the next day. My first time living alone. I'm excited. I'm getting some sleep. I get woken up 3 a.m. Stiff as a board. Can't move. I can move my eyes. I look at the foot of my bed. Who's there? The Fedora Man. Everyone knows the Fedora Man. He's there. He's standing there, observing me. Casually, non-threateningly, but clearly was him. He never has any real detail, just like a silhouette, but I saw his fedora, his suit, sharp-dressed man, standing there observing me. But what really got me was that while I still couldn't move, there was a little faint whisper in my ear that said, "Please don't leave me." My stomach imploded. I died 1,000 times. I was so scared. I'm finally able to move again. I jump up. I kiss my family goodbye. I hit the road and I say, done with that. JK. Joke's on me. Because she's with me. She came right along. Why? Because I promised her that I'd be her friend forever. Yep. Yep. I'm thankful she's not like a bad spirit. She's good. She's on my side. She really is. But don't ever make promises to ghosts because they'll make you follow through.
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely.
I swore I'd never be on TikTok, put my face on TikTok. I just have it to watch videos. I'm not a content creator, so, but I had to jump on this trend because it's just so up my alley. So let me preface by saying I'm a behavioral scientist. I'm very science-minded. I'm still not totally convinced that ghosts are like departed souls or whatever. There may be a physics explanation, but I definitely believe that there are things that happen that we can't explain. And one of those things happened when I was around 14 years old and continues until today, as far as I know. So when before I was born, my parents moved into this 100-year-old tiny little farmhouse in rural Missouri. Shortly thereafter had me and then had my brother 5 years later. Around the time that I was like 13, 14, they started realizing that we had outgrown that space. And so started building a 4-bedroom house on the same property just down across the field. Because my family have always been like mostly manual laborers and have always done like, work with their hands essentially. My family built the house themselves. And so it was mostly my dad, my grandparents, some uncles and cousins that came over to help. And pretty much as soon as the walls started going up, things started happening. Nothing ever happened in the old farmhouse, but as soon as they started building the new one, stuff started going on down there. And even whenever they were building it, as soon as the walls went up, my cousin like started refusing to come and stay working on the house after dark. Because they all had jobs, they would do the work like before and after work, and so sometimes into the night. And he would leave as soon as it started getting dark because he just said there's something wrong with the house, like something's weird. They kept hearing banging, things would get moved, and we all just kind of thought he was being a sissy and like he was just dumb. But turns out he could have been onto something. So I have so many stories of, just little things like things being moved, things going missing, and then turning up weeks later in the same place that they had gone missing from, things like that. But I'm pretty much just gonna tell like the big heavy hitters, and I might do like a part 2 or something later. So as soon as we moved in, my brother didn't really love his room. We had all like picked out our own like bed and bedding and even had like murals and stuff on the walls. And so it was like just really weird that he never wanted to spend any time there. He never wanted to sleep in there. And so, we had kind of just chalked it up to like, it's a change. It's, he's kind of a sensitive kid. Maybe he's just like kind of struggling with that transition. But he started sleeping on the couch in the living room, would never sleep in his room. And so one night, after he had done this, for a few weeks, one night, and at this point he's 9 or 10, so like way beyond the point of like wanting to do this. He asked me if he could sleep in my room with me. I'm like, yeah, I guess, like, yeah, that's fine, like, sure. So that night, and I'm trying to like talk to him, like, big sister, like, is it just like, do you miss the old house? Like, what's going on? And so he ends up telling me that the night before, when he was asleep on the couch, he thought he saw something. And so he sits up on the couch and like looks down the hallway, and he sees a little girl walking down the hallway and turning like toward my room. And so he wanted to stay in there with me because he was scared, but he was also scared for me that like something was going to happen to me. And at this point, again, I'm like complete skeptic. I don't believe in ghosts. I like adamantly, there are no monsters under the bed kind of thing. I've always kind of been that way. But I'm just trying to like reassure him, like, it's gonna be fine. It's fine. You're okay. Like, I'll keep you safe. Yada, yada, yada. So then literally 10, 15 minutes later, as we're having this conversation, he points out the window and I turn and look, and there's a little girl sitting in the tree right outside my window. Um, it was one of the most surreal, weirdest experiences of my life. And as you like, if you think about like ghosts in like movies and stuff, how they're kind of like always glowing, like just like casting light around them, almost like a candle, or like a ball of light. It wasn't like that. She wasn't solid, but she like she was light enough that I could see her even though it was dark outside, but like she wasn't casting light around her at all. And it wasn't like you immediately like look toward the light because she was so bright. It was just like she was light enough that I could see the shape of her face and like the buttons on her dress and like things like that. Um anyway, like we saw her for like a split second and immediately started screaming. So my parents run in. Of course, by the time they get there, like she's gone. Like at some point, she has just like evaporated. Um, and my mom, who is to this day like very Christian, evangelical, super religious, starts kind of trying to explain it away. Like, oh, you guys, like it's just been such a big change, and like, it was probably just the leaves and the wind, and and all of this stuff. And my dad is just quiet. He just doesn't say really anything. But before they leave, um, he just says like it's gonna be okay. You're gonna be fine, and leaves. So the next day, um, I'm talking to my dad. I'm like, at this point, like I am 14, maybe close to 15 years old. Like I'm trying to have this like rational discussion with him where I convince him that like I'm not crazy. Like we both saw it. It was absolutely real. Like why don't you believe me kind of thing. And he just looks at me and he says, I do believe you. I know it's real because I've seen her too.
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true.
About 15 years ago, I worked in a restaurant that was inside of a house. The house was about 100 years old, maybe a little bit more. It had been built originally for the first mayor of that town, small city. I don't know how long families lived in that house, but by the 80s, it had been converted to a restaurant, a somewhat well known French restaurant, which was led by a well known French chef. It sat vacant for a while after the restaurant closed and was purchased by the owners that I ended up working for in early 2008. And by the end of 2008, we opened the restaurant, and I worked there pretty much from the day it opened. When it had been converted to the first restaurant, about a third of the house had been converted to a restaurant kitchen, but the rest of the house was still very much a house. So you walked in the front door, you entered into a foyer. There was a hostess podium. There were benches and chairs for people to sit and wait for their table or to have like a cocktail or an appetizer. You would walk through a giant entryway and then into a very large dining room. I think it had originally been a formal living room. The bar was on the far end of that dining room. It shared a wall with the kitchen. There was a staircase with a landing, and then around the staircase, there was a somewhat smaller dining room. The second floor featured the restrooms and two rooms that previously had been bedrooms, but they were converted to private dining rooms. So I was the bartender. I was there most nights. I closed almost every night. And so I was often there by myself for anywhere from, an hour and a half to 2 hours. There was a lot of side work, stocking to do, prep, and a lot of glassware to polish. So I would just be in there by myself, occasionally listening to music, but mostly just being quiet and just like zoning out. And there would be nights where I would be in there in the bar, polishing glassware, doing my side work, and I could hear in the other dining room what sounded like standard restaurant noise, like the noise you hear when you walk into a restaurant, voices, people chatting, cutlery hitting plates, ice in glasses, just like regular restaurant noise. And I knew nobody was in there. I knew I was the only person there. And I knew that if there was anyone in there, it wouldn't be enough for there wouldn't be enough people to make that type of noise, right? And so I would go check, and of course, as I got down the hall around the staircase and into the room, the noise would stop. And it wasn't scary, but it was just weird. And I would bring it up to the owner, and she would say, oh, you're probably just hearing this, or you're probably just hearing this. Or at one point, she thought I needed to get my hearing checked, And then there were other nights where I would hear what sounded like kitchen noises. And if you've ever worked in a restaurant, you know what I'm talking about. Just the standard, like, pots hitting the stove, the clicking sound that like a gas stove makes when you're turning it on, water running, dishes clanging, utensils, people talking, like the cooks. I could hear like low male voices talking. And again, I knew nobody was in there. And I would be behind the bar most of the time doing that closing side work. And so the bar shared the wall with the kitchen. So it was even clearer. The kitchen door was right there. And I would still go in there and look, of course. And I'm like, I know what I'm hearing, but there's nobody there. And again, it wasn't scary. It was just like, this is weird. So the stairs to go to the second floor and the private dining rooms, you would go about 5 or 6 stairs. There was a small landing, and then the stairs would turn 5 or 6 more, and you'd be at the top. And as you got closer to the landing, up those first stairs, the temperature would start to change. It would start to get chilly, and by the time you got up to the second floor, it was outright cold. And it wasn't just the temperature change. There was like a heaviness in the air. The closer you got to the top, to the second floor, the heavier it became. It was a real uneasy feeling. And it wasn't just me that felt this, it was everyone. Other staff, other guests, right? At first, when we first opened in that first month or two, the owners just kept trying to figure out if like the heating was broken. I mean, again, it was a large old house. So they were like, it's just the heat, it's this and this and this. And eventually there was just no other answers. It was that something was going on. Nobody wanted to go to the bathroom because it was up there. And if I hadn't gone to the bathroom before everybody left, I would be holding it because there was no way I was going to the bathroom in that building by myself. One day I was working a double, and I had about 3 or 4 hours between my shifts, and I was taking college classes at the time. So I thought I would just go up to one of those private dining rooms and study. This was the middle of the day, broad daylight, like 2, 3 in the afternoon. I take all my stuff up there. I go sit down, and I only made it in one of those rooms for like 30, 45 minutes. It was so uncomfortable. It was just oppressive. The air was oppressive up there. It was just, I was very uneasy. People would, like large parties would make reservations. They would dine up there once or twice, and then they would ask to be seated in the dining room. And we didn't have room for large parties in the dining room downstairs. And they were like, we don't care. You can break our party up. We just don't really like it up there. Like nobody wanted to be up there. So one night I was there by myself, and we had recently gotten a television for the bar. So I was standing with my back to the bar, and I was looking up at watching the television with the sound kind of low while I was polishing glassware. And I was looking at the television, and I just like, at the same time, this like dark blur just like zipped by my right eye. And I felt like this jolt of electricity just go all down the side of my face and my neck. The hair on my arm just stood up on my right arm. So I turned and looked, and I was facing that large entryway that I mentioned that was connected to the foyer, and I didn't see anything. But I just knew like something else is here. Wasn't scared, but just kind of I don't know. I went around the bar, I went out into the foyer because I was just looking for anything. And at this point, I know like it's not another human being, but something is in this building with me. And I was rounding the stairs, and as I got closer into that other dining room, I started to feel the electricity even more. So you would walk through the door to that other dining room was on the right hand side, and around you would around the corner into the dining room, and there was like a little weird alcove. Nobody really knew what it was, and you could fit like a table and two chairs there, like a bistro table and chairs there. And as I walked further into that dining room and got closer to that alcove, all the hair on my body stood up. Not necessarily my scalp, but like my arms, the back of my neck. Like I felt like someone had just zapped me with electricity, and it just kept getting stronger. And I started to get uneasy. That's when I started to get uneasy. And again, I wasn't fearful, but all I could say with certainty was that I knew that something was in that house with me, or some things, group of people, I don't know, and they were in that alcove. They were sitting at that bistro table. I shut everything down. I left. I did not finish my side work. I came in the next day. My boss was like, "Why was all this stuff out?" And I told her what happened. And she was just like, "Yeah, there's been some stories about this house." And I'm like, "Oh, so now you tell us like all this stuff about me hearing things and saying, and you're trying to make it seem like I'm crazy." Anyway, long story short, that experience changed my entire perspective on what I think quote unquote ghosts are. I don't necessarily believe in ghosts as ghosts. After that day, I no longer believed in like transparent figures floating around a house. You know what I mean? It's energy. It is just straight up energy, and that is absolutely what I felt that day.
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true.
Okay, I got one because me and my dad literally just talked about this story like recently, and it still creeps me out to this day. So, my dad's best friend, my Uncle Marshall, um, this is someone that him and my dad, they grew up together in Nigeria, all from childhood till they graduated high school. When they graduated high school, my Uncle Marshall came to America. And once he got here, he did everything in his power to get my dad over here, which he did. So, yeah, thick as thieves, besties. So, around the time when I was like 5 or 6, my Uncle Marshall is always at the house, like, was always at the house because him and my dad, they were young, so they were always like drinking, partying, all of that. And um, if my uncle was, too drunk to drive, he would just be on our couch. He would fall asleep on our couch, whatever that may be. He was always there. Even if they weren't going out and it was just late, he would just, like, I just knew, like, Uncle Marshall, he'd be on the couch. He'd be asleep on the couch. One thing though that I looked forward to whenever he did stay the night, even whenever he just came over, he really loved me and my siblings. Like he would, if the ice cream truck was outside, he's the one like, come on, let's go. Like to go get us ice cream. He's always bringing over like sweets, candies, all of those things for us, presents, all of that. So, anytime I know that he's there, I know that when he wakes up, we're going to get like some good stuff. But unfortunately, my uncle ended up getting cancer. And so I remember, again, around like age 5, 6, us going to the hospital to go see him. He was up, he was talking, like he was fine and all of that. And yeah, I just remember thinking because I was so young, I wasn't really understanding like what cancer, I didn't know what cancer was. So to me, I'm like, okay, he's sick. I get that, but he's in the hospital, so he's going to be okay. I didn't understand like any other alternative to not being okay. So maybe like a week or two after the hospital visit, one night I wake up and just want to go lay in my parents' bed. Just wanted to go lay with them. And so as I'm leaving my room, I am walking past the living room and I see Uncle Marshall on the couch. He's laying on the couch. And at first, I wasn't sure if it was him because I didn't remember him coming over the night before. So I look closer and it's dark because it's nighttime. I look closer And then he looks up at me. And so I'm like, oh, that is Uncle Marshall. He looks up and he just like waves. And I'm like, and then I'm like, I get excited because I'm like, oh yes, he's here. We're gonna get some good stuff in the morning. So I was kind of excited to see him. So after I did my wave, I kept going and went to my parents' room. So once I got in the bed, so I'm trying to squeeze in between my parents or whatever. And so it wakes up my dad. My dad wakes up, and yeah, so I'm like trying to snuggle with him, and I just tell him like, "Oh, Uncle Marshall is here. He's on the couch." And my dad's like, "What?" I was like, "Uncle Marshall, he's on the couch." He was like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like trying to say it again because I'm confused. Like, are you not understanding me? Uncle Marshall's here. And as I'm saying that, literally the phone starts ringing. So my dad picks up the phone, and it's literally the hospital letting him know that my Uncle Marshall had passed. So now my dad is like hysterical. He's waking up my mom, and they're both like saying, that he's gone. And I'm like, I'm still not getting it. I'm like, he's on the couch. And my dad keeps like, what am I talking about? We get up, we go into the living room. He's not there because he's at the hospital. Yeah. So my dad kept asking me, like, what did you see? What did you see? I was like, I started getting scared. I'm like, I saw him. He waved at me. He was on the couch. Like, I was not getting it. So, yeah. So that was my first encounter seeing paranormal. Rest in peace, to my uncle. That was the last time I saw him, but apparently he did come back again to like other people. That's like a whole nother story. Like if you're Nigerian, you already know it's a mess. It's a longer story, but that was my interaction. A lot of people were like, no, you might have dreamt it, but I was like, there was no reason. Why would I literally wake up out of my sleep, see him, wave at him, and 2 minutes later, we get the phone call that he's gone. I don't know, but creepy.
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true.
Okay, perfect, because I have one, and it's actually like a really good story, and it's a story that I honestly don't even think I've told anybody. But when I was 16, I lived literally in the middle of BF nowhere. I was in Texas, and I got a bicycle for my 16th birthday, and I was super excited because that meant I basically had like my freedom. So I would just ride around on my bicycle, and since I was in the middle of nowhere, like it was just like a bunch of like dirt roads, and you would end up in like the back of people's properties, and like it was like rural, like nobody really cared what you were doing out there. So I realized if I went about like half an hour ride on my bicycle, I would get to the edge of this person's property, and in the back of their property they actually had a graveyard, and it was a really old graveyard. A lot of the tombstones were listed from like really late 1800s to like early 1900s, like 1903. Like they're really old, and it was so obvious that nobody kept up with the graveyard. Like everything was dirty and overgrown. And of course, like I thought I was like 16 and edgy and cool, so I'd go hang out in the graveyard. But then eventually I started going there maybe like once or twice a week, and I started cleaning things up just because I felt bad about these people who were obviously like forgotten about. And I remember there was these 2 headstones that I was specifically attracted to, and I'm assuming the woman died like in childbirth, or like her and her kid must have gotten ill around the same time. But it was like a woman, and she, from like her birth date to like her death date, was literally around like the same age as I am, like right now. And I was just like, what's such a shame that she, died so young, and then like her baby's tombstone was like right next to her. Well, I would just go and I would like clean everything up. Well, this one day, I honestly, and I'm not someone who really I believe in the paranormal just because I've seen a couple of things that I can't explain, but I do feel like a lot of paranormal things aren't actually real, and it's just people making shit up. But like this actually happened, and I went to the graveyard that day. Up until then, I had never felt anything creepy. I never felt weird. Everything was always really chill. And I was over at their tombstones, like just cleaning everything up, pulling some weeds. And mind you, It was a completely still day. Like, there was no wind. It was the middle of the summer. It's hot outside. There was literally no wind. And I'm sitting there and I'm like cleaning things up, and I get the strongest smell of perfume. Like, I'm talking, it suddenly smelled like I was standing in the middle of like a field of flowers. Like, it was just like super strong. And I felt not like dread. I don't think dread is the right word, but I felt like this overwhelming feeling of like, you need to leave. Like, you need to get out of here. And it was calm. It didn't feel threatening. I just felt like it was almost like an audible, like someone told me like, you need to leave. And I literally remember, like, I didn't even think twice about it. I was like, I need to get out of here. And I literally like packed up all my little things. I always have like my little headphones. I didn't put my headphones in. I got on my bike and I pedaled my ass back home so fast. And like, I just remember having the feeling of like, you need to leave and you can't come back. And I left, and literally, like, that was it. Like, I stopped going. I didn't go back there. I never felt threatened by whatever was out there, but I just felt like, you can't go back like this. You need to not come back here. 2 weeks later, it was in the news that a woman who had been jogging along that same road that I rode my bike almost every single day was abducted and killed by somebody, and they never found out who. And to this day, I really feel like whether it was that woman whose headstone I was cleaning or somebody else in that graveyard who maybe just appreciated the fact that I cared about them, gave me that warning to leave and kept that from, happening to me. So that's my story.
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely.
I have two big ones that have personally happened to me. One of them is super scary. The other one is nice, and I'm going to tell you the nice one first. Okay, so to preface this, spooky things have always happened to my stepmom, and 99% of the unexplainable things that have happened to me have also been in her presence. She's just one of those, like, magnets for this type of thing. So my stepmom's best friend from childhood passed away when they were in their early 20s. Later, my little brother, my stepmom's son, was born on the birthday of this particular friend. And my brother was born with like 4 concurrent congenital heart conditions. So his whole early life, first couple of years of life, he was in and out of the hospital, having heart surgery, cath labs, all that kind of stuff. On Valentine's Day one year, my father got my stepmom just like this crappy stuffed heart from like a gas station. And when you pressed on the heart's hand, it would play this song. And the song was like, do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, if you know it. And they started having this thing happen where pretty much every year on my brother's birthday, also the friend's birthday, or Christmas, or anytime my brother was going to have kind of a big procedure done in the hospital, this heart would go off by itself. And it like didn't need to have batteries. Like just randomly you would hear the do-do-do-do-do when something big was going on, particularly around my brother, birthday twins. So I knew about the heart. I knew that this would happen sometimes. Spooky, but nice, right? Because it's assumed to be the best friend. Who wouldn't love that? That's nice. One day, me and my stepmom are home alone and we're just sitting downstairs, sort of folding laundry or something, just talking. And she's telling me about this dream she had about her best friend one night. And there were a lot of unanswered questions kind of around this particular friend's death. And, my stepmom was really missing her one night. My father has night terrors, so he'll often kind of like go sleep on the couch if he's having a bad night so he doesn't disturb my stepmom, and he'll always close the bedroom door behind him. In this particular dream, my stepmom dreamt that the door was closed, my father wasn't there, and her friend comes in the door, kind of like gets into bed with her, and they just talk. And she told me that this felt so real that her friend answered all the questions that she had surrounding her death. They got to express how much they missed each other. And it was just really like calming and soothing for her to have that sort of final conversation with her friend. She wakes up the next morning from this dream and the door is open, as if in the dream her friend had opened the door. So she's telling me this really like meaningful dream she had with her friend, and we're both folding laundry, and she pauses in the middle of laundry and she goes, "Wait, hold on." And from upstairs in the nursery where that heart is, as we're talking about this friend, we both hear do 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 do. It sent chills down my spine because we were talking about her. She knew we were talking about her. This thing went off. And it was just a sign of like, I know you're talking about me. I'm here. However, I was 16 and like a scaredy cat, and I was sleeping in the room where the heart was. So I walked in later and I was like, hi. Please don't do anything while I'm here. Thank you. Love you. Bye. I never thought it was like super creepy, minus like the context is a little spooky, a little eerie. But my brother is 16 now, and he had to get a lab done last year, like his first big procedure in a long time. And it went off, but because the batteries are ancient, it did sound creepy this time.
It's on our little roof inlet thing. And it just went off.
Okay, I'm sorry. Work has been crazy. I will tell you guys my scary ghost story now. I tried to record this. It got way too long, so I'm gonna try. Okay, I grew up in Washington. My other set of parents, my father and stepmom, live outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. So I would go stay with them like once or twice a year, let's say. This particular time, they had just moved to a new house, and I was very excited because their last house was a dark place. Scary. I have stories about that house that I will not share here, but let's just say that I was super relieved that they were not there anymore. I was excited. So picture it, summer, 17, I'm going to stay with my other family. I'm like, oh, creepy things won't happen anymore. That's great. Little did I know. Okay, quick layout. Bottom floor, all the living area, set of stairs, very small landing, and all the bedrooms are clustered around this landing. On this particular night, everyone goes to bed before me, let's say at like 10. Parents in one room with my baby brother, my other little brother who's like 12 at the time in the other room, and then the nursery, which is where I'm sleeping. Okay, so it's like midnight, I'm awake, I'm 17, I'm reading a book. I had just gone to the bathroom, so I knew for a fact everyone was upstairs because they all sleep with their doors open. The landing is super small, so I saw all of them a moment ago. They were all fully asleep in their beds. So I'm minding my own business, reading, and from the bottom of the stairs, I hear something. And it's footsteps on the stairs. And it sounded like a little kid almost, like, you know how little kids just like kind of barrel up and down the stairs, like do 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 do. Yeah. Stops at the top of the stairs. I'm like, what the is this? I hear it go back down. Do 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 do. This continues to happen. I hear it multiple times. Do 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 do. My grandma was very spooky and kooky, and she always told me if anything paranormal happened to ignore it, because if you pay attention, you'll like feed into the energy and it will get more aggressive and stronger or something. So this is in my head and I'm like, I'm ignoring this. Nothing's happening. Everything's fine. And again, stuff had happened at their last house and I was just like, not again. So I'm ignoring it because it's gonna stop, right? At this point, I have like a headphone in, volume very low, pretending I'm not listening to the running up and down the stairs. I hear it come back up. Do, 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 do. It stops. It stops for a few minutes. I'm like, okay, maybe it's done. Let's say 5 minutes passed after this thing had stopped at the top of the stairs. Again, the landing is small, so let's say hypothetically, wherever this thing stopped is like 3 feet from my closed door.
After a few minutes, I'm sure everything is all good. I kind of relax and I'm still reading my book. And then suddenly, it was like a full-grown man, like a 6-foot tall man, took both of his fists and slammed it way harder than that. Slammed it against the door of the room I was sleeping in. The door shook. I jump up. If there's fight and flight, there's also freeze. And I fucking froze. I was so scared. But again, my grandma's wisdom, I'm like, I have to ignore it. Nothing happened. 2 minutes later, again, harder. And the vibe was genuinely like, don't ignore me. That was like the vibe I got from the second slam. A couple minutes go by, I haven't moved. But I'm like, what do I do? I decide to take action. I take my blanket, wrap it around my body for protection. Flip on my bedroom light. I swing open the door to meet my fate. The landing is empty. Everyone is sleeping, obviously. I flip on the hallway light, flip off my light. Flip on my brother's light, flip off the hallway light. Close his door, shake him half awake, and I'm like, scoot over, I'm sleeping in here. I'm 17, he's 12. We haven't shared a bed in several years, but that's how scared I was. It is summer in Nevada, and I literally have the covers over my face like this, and I'm like breathing in my own carbon dioxide, but I was like, I have to have the covers over my face. After like 15 minutes on his door, again, softer, but kind of like a, I know you're still in there. I was like, thank God I'm going home tomorrow. Anyway, this started happening to them after I left. This would happen on my brother's door, the slamming. From downstairs, they would also start hearing like muffled arguments at the landing, like voices fighting. Anyway, they moved out of the house as quickly as possible because it was super scary. I don't know if this was like an actual ghost. I don't know if this was like residual energy from like a bad DV type of thing going on in that house previously, but I did not like it. And yeah, that's it. Sorry this was super long.
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true.
Okay, so basically for the first 18 years of my life, I lived with some kind of like demon, evil entity thing. I don't know. All I know is that when he first appeared, when I was like 6 years old in my dreams, he would come to me like every night, every other night. He came to me for a while, and he would like make me kill a bunch of people in my dreams, or else he was gonna torture them for eternity. It was weird. But at the end of every single dream, he'd be like, okay, well, I'll see you like tomorrow night, but remember, don't tell anybody about this. And I'd just be like, okay. And then finally, at one point, I decided I should tell a trusted adult about this. And so I went into the kitchen where my mother was, and I was like, hey, Mom, I need to tell you about this dream. It's terrifying. And she was like, okay. And then as I started to tell her about the dream, the thing like appeared in the kitchen, and it was the first time I had ever seen him like while I was awake. Basically, he was just this like shadow thing with red eyes. I don't fucking know. And so he like appeared in the kitchen, broad daylight, like, and started running towards me. And so I stopped talking about it and was like, never mind. And then he disappeared, and I was like, okay, that's weird. And so then I went to school, and I was talking to one of my friends. I was like, let me try this again. And so I was like, hey, do you want to hear about my dream last night? And they were like, oh, okay. And so then I started telling her, and then boom, he appears on the other side of the playground, starts running towards me, and I was like, oop, never mind. And he disappears. And then he never showed up in my dreams again after that. I guess he got mad at me for trying to tell people. I don't know. But anyways, I kind of forgot that he existed, because like I would occasionally feel him come in and just like stand in my corner of my room and just stare at me, and I'd just be like, leave me alone, please. But that's fine. And then I just kind of forgot that he existed because, like, you know, my mom died. I was going through like medical issues, and there was trauma, and there was a bunch of other stuff going on. So I forgot he existed. And then we finally got dogs when I was in high school, and our tiny little Yorkie, we were chilling on the bed, and she loves meeting new people. Not that this thing is a people, but anyway, she loves it. And finally she comes. She's sitting in my room, and then I guess the thing walked in and went to his corner where he would hang out and just watch me. And so the thing was like, she was sitting on my bed. The dog was sitting on my bed, and the thing walks in, and she like perks her head up, looks at the door, watches it, follows it to like the corner where it would stand at, and she like gets up and she's like shaking her little tail, and she's so excited, and she like goes over and tries to like sniff it and play with it. And I was like, oh fuck, I forgot about this thing that lives here. And then we got a big dog, and that big dog had a very different reaction to this thing coming into my room, because big old dog Abby was sitting on the bed. And I guess the thing walked in, and, you know, little Gigi's like, oh my god, that thing is here, let me go play with it. And I was like, you're fucking weird. And the big dog immediately jumped down off the bed, got into a defensive position, hackles up, growling, showing teeth, like starts barking at this thing. And Gigi was like, what are you doing? Like, this is our buddy. And I was like, good God. And so I just like, we left the room, and I took them for a walk, and I was like, we're just gonna leave. By the time we got back, I guess it had fucked off to wherever it fucks off to when it's not staring at me. And then another thing that happened was my sister was homesick from school one day, and our rooms were right next to each other, and she was completely by herself, and she heard this crash in my room, like something had fallen over, and then she heard somebody sprint out of my room. And so she like went to go check and was like, Carter, you here? And I was not there, I was at school. You were homesick, alone, dummy. And so she like went in, nothing had fallen in my room, nothing had been knocked over, and so she was just like, oh, that's fantastic. And then finally, I went off to college. I was 18 and I left, and I guess this pissed this thing off, because I'm driving home one day, the February of my freshman year, and I get a call, and they're just like, hey, yo, the house is on fire, so see you in a couple hours. And I was like, oh, house is on fire, okay. And so I get home, and the garage and the attic had completely burned down. The rest of the house was fine, but it had been completely like smoke and water damage, so we were not going to be living there anymore. I don't 100% know that they found the cause of the fire. I don't know. But yeah, whenever I walked into the house, I was like expecting it to just feel like my house, which typically felt like something was sitting on my chest and I couldn't breathe. Like I just, that house just made me feel so, and I thought it was because of like all the grief and trauma that house was associated with, which was probably also part of it. But when I tell you, after this fire, I walked in, and it felt so light and airy in there. Like there was no evil, gross presence in there anymore. And I was just like, oh my god, guys, let's live here. This place is fantastic. This is a great aura. And my dad was like, it caught on fire, we can't live here anymore. And I was like, understandable. So yeah, anytime we visited after that, when they were doing renovations and we were selling it and stuff, like it felt so light and airy. It was amazing. But yeah, I haven't seen the thing since. I've encountered other ghosts at other places I've lived at, just little visitors and stuff. My mom came to me before she died and was just like, goodbye, and then like walked into a light or something and was like, I love you, it's okay. And I was like, okay. But yeah, no, that was the thing I grew up with. That was entirely too long of an explanation. So if you watch this whole thing, good job. I'm okay.
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true.
Okay, so a couple years ago, I was in Estes Park, Colorado. I'm a wildlife photographer, so I was actually there looking for elk to photograph. And I've always just been fascinated with all this paranormal stuff. I love watching ghost shows. I love watching Sam and Colby on YouTube. It's all so fascinating to me, even though I've never had a paranormal experience up till this moment. It just was very fascinating to me. So because of that, I wanted to stay in the Stanley Hotel, which is in Estes Park and is notoriously one of the most haunted hotels in the world. Sam and Colby have done multiple videos there and have captured some pretty crazy stuff. Anyways, I even decided to buy one of those little spirit boxes to see if I could communicate with anything while I was there. So I roll up to the Stanley, I get my room, and then I go back into my truck, got some dinner, and I drove back and was sitting in the parking lot of the Stanley, and I was FaceTiming my sister at this moment. And I was like, hey, should I open this spirit box up and try it out in the parking lot here? And we are like, yeah, sure, why not? So I opened this spirit box, start asking questions for probably 10 minutes, not a single thing, no response whatsoever. So I was like, okay, this is kind of dumb. But I was like, why don't I take it up to the room, see if I get anything there? So I go into my hotel room, which is very eerie, by the way. They've got all these pictures of like really old-timey photos of creepy old people standing there. You know how it is. And I'm still FaceTiming my sister. And I asked all kinds of questions while I was in the hotel room for probably another 10 minutes. Again, no response. So I say to my sister, I go, well, it clearly doesn't like me, so why don't you ask it a question? And I kid you not, clear as day, the spirit box goes, no, you ask it something. Like in like a sassy voice. I'm dead serious. It hadn't said anything this entire time until I say to my sister, you ask it a question, and it was almost like I was talking to some dude on the phone. It sounded that clear. It says, no, you ask it something. And I freaked out. I turned the spirit box off. My sister started freaking out over the phone. And to this day, I just can't explain it. I can't really debunk it. I'm a very rational person. So I've tried, and I've even taken apart the spirit box, and it's just the normally wired like radio device. So anyways, it was quite the creepy night that night staying there alone. I slept with the lights on. But yeah, that's my story. So pretty weird stuff.
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true. I'll go first.
Okay, so in my house growing up, my childhood bedroom was attached to the attic. It was in my closet, and there was like this little wooden door on the other side behind my clothes. And when you opened it, you couldn't actually see into the attic. You could only see up the stairs that would take you to the attic. So I never messed with it. I just left it alone. I was like, I don't want to, this is too much. So I would barricade it. I would just leave the escape ladder for a fire in front of it. So I knew that if it was opened, I would hear it. And for a very long time, I always felt like there was a presence in my room. I didn't really know what was going on. It never felt like I was truly alone, and I was an only child of only children. So like your girl was alone all the time. And I eventually moved my room around to the point where I had this little desk that was like a triangle style desk, so it went straight into the corner. And one day, one night, I woke up in the middle of the night to my bunny rabbit banging against his crate, which he would do almost every night at almost the same exact time, 3:34 a.m. And one night I look over under this desk, and there's this little boy under there. And I can tell he's not real, but like I don't really know why I can tell he's not real. It's just maybe he was just like fainter. I just could tell he wasn't a real person. And I wasn't scared. He wasn't scary. He was just in this little like ball kind of sitting under my desk, and he just looked sad. He just looked sad. And I mean, I didn't love that he was there, but I really didn't mind it too much, maybe because I was half asleep. So I went back to bed, woke up, he was gone, obviously, and I just kind of I went through my day, whatever. And every so often, I would end up waking up to my bunny at the same exact time, and he would just be under this desk in my bedroom. And my parents didn't believe in ghosts, and I didn't really tell anyone about it because I was just like, this is weird. What if I'm dreaming? I don't know what's really going on. That wasn't a conversation that my family and I had about ghosts, whatever. And I just kind of let it be. But as I got older, he never really went away. And I would always just get really creeped out in my house as I got older, and my family never understood why. Like, I didn't really like for it to be dark. I had a nightlight for years, like well into my teenage years. And it was just always because I knew there were other presence in the house. And he was, I'm going to tell you how he was dressed because it's going to play a role in a second. He looked like a little chimney sweep from Mary Poppins. He had the whole attire, the hat. He had what looked like soot on him, and I just thought it was because he lived in the attic upstairs, and that's how I justified it. And I just kind of was like, whatever, didn't really talk to him, didn't really converse with him. Let it be. I moved out of the house once I went to college and became an adult, bought my house, moved out, and my dad lived in the house last by himself. He was working on selling the house and told me one night that he had a dream. And it was really weird because he was almost being shown the house by someone who he had never seen there, who he didn't know, who was a little kid, and he didn't really understand the importance of this kid, but this kid just wanted to show him around the house. And he was like, it was really daunting because I woke up and he was just kind of looking at me from the end of my bed. And I walked around with him. He didn't say anything. And then we just kind of went on our way, and that was it. And I was like, okay, so tell me more about this little boy. Because mind you, I had never told my family this little boy, what he looked like, anything like that. I just said that I felt like there was something in the house all the time. That's all I said. And he proceeds to tell me that it looks like he has like suspenders on, and like he's from like early 20s, mid, or not early 20s, early 1900s, mid 1900s, and that he was like kind of dirty. And I was like, oh, that's super interesting. Is there any chance he was wearing like a little hat like a chimney sweep would? And he goes, yeah, it kind of did look like one of those hats. And I was like, interesting. Okay. And was he like almost covered in soot, like maybe he was a chimney sweep? And he goes, yeah, he was pretty dirty. And I was like, that's really interesting. And this was a boy, right? Like he was probably like 8, 9. And he was like, yeah, that's exactly about how old I would have pegged him for. And I was like, yeah, that boy has been living in my bedroom for almost my entire life. And you got to meet him, I guess, because you're the only one there. And he was like, no, no, no. And I was like, yeah, he showed up in your dreams. Probably around 3 a.m. is when he came and popped by, because I know that you go to work at 4:30 a.m. He goes, yeah, I was awake for probably like an hour before my alarm went off for me to like go to work. And I was like, that's interesting. That is interesting. So I convinced my dad that ghosts are real and that I had been seeing his ghost for 15 plus years, and he got to meet him.